Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. I know that I've made a video on this firearm in the past, but it was just a tad over 4 minutes long and not much more than Wikipedia level in depth, although I did accidentally shoot my camera while filming. The French Model 1892 revolver needs a proper video, as I intend to do a short series on my French handguns. In general, the French could be very innovative in design when it came to martial firearms during the latter half of the 19th century, introducing things that would change the world. It was just an execution where things would make you question their decisions. Remember when I praised the Italians in my Carcano M 1891 video for waiting until developments took hold so they didn't have to make mistakes or see the need to replace a recently adopted firearm like the innovators and early adopters? The French were polar opposites. In the way, the French were like a 19th century version of Kel-Tec. Since this video is about the 1892 revolver, we need a little background. While Colt was making percussion cap muzzle-loading revolvers such as the Walker and 1851 Navy, Le Fichot turned out pinfire revolvers. Developed by Eugene Le Fichot, his namesake revolver provided innovations such as cartridge loading from the rear of a completely bored-out cylinder, using a pinfire cartridge, a loading gate, one could call this a gull wing as it opened at the top, and an ejector rod. The French Navy would adopt the revolver in 1858, as even though the cartridge had much less energy than the muzzle-loading offerings for Colt, it did keep the powder from getting wet. The Le Fichot would bring government contracts from other nations, as well as show up on both sides of the American Civil War as private purchase firearms. Eugene did not rest on his laurels, as he worked on not only developing a revolver that fired centerfire cartridges, but also double action. He was granted the patent for the double action lockwork on September 5, 1856, and his first centerfire revolver was patented on September 9, 1868. While he wanted to improve his revolver, the Navy already adopted, he wanted his lucrative Army contract, as they still fielded the single-shot percussion cap pistols, some of these conversions from Napoleonic-era flintlocks. After some tests and updates, the new Le Fichot double-action revolver that fired the 11mm Navy cartridge would be adopted on February 3, 1870, and Le Fichot would build them as Saint-Étienne was cranking out Chassepot rifles, although they were responsible for accepting the revolvers. The Franco-Prussian War would begin in July, and Paris would be under siege by September. There are no good records of use of the 1870 during the war, but 8,000 sailors were called upon to help defend the city, and my source speculates that many 1870s went directly into sailors' hands from Le Fichot without being sent to Saint-Étienne. After France's defeat, the terrible year with a proto-communist rebellion in Paris before the government regained control of the city, Le Fichot was able to complete an initial order of 6,000 by 1873, with Moss producing a small number of an upgraded revolver called the 1870N in following years. All 1858s would be converted to 1870s as well. The Navy's funds, unlike the Army, were limited as they were also testing a new rifle which would be adopted as the Kropatschek in 1878, and they had a hard time competing against the Army's use of state arsenals for production of small arms. As the French military looked to further modernize after the humiliation of the Franco-Prussian War, the Army looked to replace the aforementioned percussion cap single-shot pistols with a modern revolver. The Army would look at 4 revolvers, including the Le Fichot, Galan, Puteaux, and the Chamelot Delvine. While the Le Fichot did have some advantages, such as a better trigger pull and a more comfortable grip, Army-Navy rivalry and Eugene's relationship with Napoleon III led to the choice of the Chamelot Delvine, which would become the Model 1873 revolver. It was a double single-action revolver that fired the 11mm 1873 ordnance round. The loading gate would open to the rear as opposed to up or down. Due to the nearly 397,000 revolvers produced during its run, Moss was able to get the cost down, and the Navy would submit and adopt the 1873 as well. While the French were still leaders in revolver design, and the 1870 and 1873 revolvers were heads above the Reichsrevolver, the United States is catching up with Smith & Wesson and Colt's producing quality centerfire revolvers. While the Colt Model 1873 was single action only, it did fire a cartridge with 6 times the muzzle energy of the Chamelot Delvine. The French round would only have the same energy as a 25 ACP. The Navy would continue to use their 11mm round from the 1870, which had the similar energy to a 32 ACP. The 1873 proved to be a long-lasting revolver, as they'd be pressed into service as late as World War II, where the cylinder would be dangerously reamed out to shoot 45 ACP by Free French forces. In 1885, a conflict between Serbia and Bulgaria threatened to bring in larger powers. While the Balkans didn't lead to a larger war, this time, France would look at Germany's adoption of the Mauser 7184 rifle and the 1883 improvement of the Revolver. While the Revolver was inferior to the French 1873 in almost every way, it still fired a much more powerful round that had similar energy to the .44 Russian. The French General Staff would order that the process begin to replace the Model 1873. Two revolvers were looked at, the Portuguese Model 1878 and Swiss Schmidt Model 1882, both having an Abadi lockwork. Basically, opening the loading gate would lock the hammer not quite at a half-cock position, creating a safe condition. With the gate down and hammer locked in place, one can pull the trigger to advance the cylinder, making loading and unloading faster. CN Arsenal Primer 139 goes into great detail on the Abadi system, and I recommend you check it out. Prototypes were prepared using the same 11mm round as the 1873. This was the test model 1885. It was prone to black powder fouling, and the Commission decided that this wasn't a big enough improvement over the 1873 to adopt it. Another thing that doomed the 1885 was, of course, Paul Viel's Powder B, the first smokeless powder. The Model 1886 Lebel rifle was developed with an 8mm round propelled by smokeless powder. They would look to a smaller caliber for the revolver as well and started testing the Swiss M1882 and a 7.5mm cartridge. General Georges Boulanger, who was Minister of War, ordered work to proceed without delay on a new revolver that fired the yet-to-be-developed 8mm cartridge. This may sound a little foolhardy and headstrong, but this was par for the course for General Boulanger, as it was he who pushed hard for the massive production of the Lebel rifle as quick as possible. Luckily for the development of the revolver, Moss, Chateauroux, and Tula were hard at work spinning out rifles, and this delayed production of the Model 1887 revolver, with prototypes of what became the 8mm ordnance revolver cartridge. This delayed testing and allowed new developments to find their way into the 1892 revolver. It was unfortunate for France that this wasn't the other way around, as soldiers might have seen a better rifle than the almost immediately obsolete Lebel, and the Berthier might have taken hold much sooner. As for General Boulanger, he would go on to nearly lead a coup against the Republic, with disparate allies such as communists and monarchists, hesitate at the fateful moment, flee when charged with treason, and commit suicide at his former mistress's grave with a prototype 1885 revolver, serial number 3. In 1889, Colt released its new Navy revolver in .38 Long Colt that had a swing-out cylinder with simultaneous ejection, and French engineers looked to add this feature to the new revolver. Some French sources point out that Hugo Borchardt had also come up with the design when he was with Winchester, but by this time he was working on semi-auto pistols with Ludwig Loewe. Whatever the case, this was added to the new revolver, with Inspector Richard of Moss pushing the revolver to its final form. Alright, we just went over the history leading up to the development of the Model 1892, so let's just show what we finally ended up with. I also have a Colt Model 1901 here as a contemporary comparison. This is an updated version of the 1889 Navy in .38 Long Colt. I don't have an 1889 Navy, so this is what I got. This was issued to the military there, as you can see on the butt plate. So first of all, I'm going to show you that this is unloaded, because I'm going to be pulling the trigger to demonstrate a couple things here. First thing I want to show you is note how the hammer does not touch the frame of the revolver. Watch what happens when I pull the trigger. Cylinder indexes, it fires in double action, but as I release the trigger, it rebounds. So this keeps it from striking a primer, while in the holster or getting knocked around or possibly getting dropped. Let me swing the cylinder out here. So note that you cannot see the firing pin through the frame there. Whereas on the Colt, you have the old American problem where you probably should just carry this with 5 rounds and an empty chamber with the pin, because note that you can see the firing pin there, and if this gets bumped, you could possibly hit the primer. Now, I'm sure that got better as revolvers got more developed, and that was definitely more of a problem in the old single action revolvers. But I still wouldn't carry this revolver with a loaded bore in front of the firing pin there. So anyway, let's go over this a little bit more with the Abity system. Start here again. Now, pull the trigger with the gate closed, cylinder indexes, fires in double action. You open the gate, the hammer actually locks open here a little bit, and even if you accidentally pull this back in single action and pull the trigger, you notice it does not go all the way in, so you're not going to strike a primer. Also, the Abity system was originally made on single loading revolvers, so let's pretend that this doesn't swing out for a moment. And when you're loading, just pull the trigger, it indexes the cylinder, so that actually makes it faster for reloading. But the thing is that this does swing out, and it swings out to the right as opposed to most American revolvers that swing out to the left. And the thinking here was that this was really kind of designed for the cavalry, the thinking was. So, let's say you're trying to reload your revolver, you hold it with your left hand, with the reins in your left hand in case your horse isn't steady, and then your hand that has more dexterity, you reload, you load it with your right hand. So that's kind of the thinking on the whole swing out to the right as opposed to the left. Another thing you might notice on the Model 1892 is these two little notches here between the flutes, or you don't have that on the 1901. This keeps the this keeps the cylinder from indexing without you wanting it to. Let's go ahead and pop this out. Those catch on this little protrusion right here, which when you pull the trigger, that will release it to index and for you to fire. Whereas on the Colt, you have just that and that little notch, and you can easily index it, possibly when you don't want to. And one more thing I want to show you is an update that was made for the, I believe for the 1887 from the 1873 to access the inner workings, and for cleaning, all I got to do is unscrew this large screw. Whoa! This large screw here. It opens up, and you notice that that's on a swivel. That wasn't on a swivel in the 1873, and apparently that was enough of a problem with lost side plates and or just them falling in the dirt that was a solution they wanted to find to that problem. All I got to do is pull that grip off, and you can see that this is actually a fairly simple revolver. It does have less parts and less moving parts than the Colt, which a lot of times that's a keep it simple, stupid type thing, and makes it typically more robust. Of course, the big thing that this revolver has against it is the round that it fires. The 8mm French ordnance, that only has about 2/3 the power that the 38 Long Colt did, or the smokeless version of the 38 Long Colt. And if you know anything about your American history, 38 Long Colt is very much maligned. They pretty much scrapped it after the Philippine insurrection, where there's complaints about no stopping power versus Moro natives in the Philippines. So the U.S. went back to the 45 Long Colt. They were actually handing out single-action armies again until 1909. There was a new army, which was double action, still 45 Long Colt. And of course, we know about the 1911 and 45 ACP and the 1917 revolvers in 45 Long Colt. And of course, the British, their colonial experiences led them to also stick with the bigger round. That's why they had the 455 Webley, and the Germans with the 1908 Luger has the 9mm, that's still in use today. And although that's smaller than the 45s, it is, still has enough, speed, which, provides a lot more power than the 8mm French ordnance. So that's really the only downfall to this. I mean, this is actually a well-built revolver. It's definitely either overbuilt for the round or the round was underpowered for the revolver, depending on which way you look at it. So there's a look at the revolver. Let's get back to the history. The revolver was officially adopted on June 3rd, 1892. It fired the 8x27mm French ordnance cartridge, which was developed in the years between the model 1887 from the initial black powder round to smokeless powder. It would have about the same power as the later 32 ACP and 2/3 of the final iteration of the American 38 Long Colt. A majority of the revolver's production would be complete by 1903-1904, although production would continue to 1934. Revolver production would not be a priority during the Great War, as production centered on rifles and machine guns, leading to importations of anything they could get, mainly from Spain. The revolver would see some use during World War II, with the Germans even giving it a designation, the Revolver 637F. Most practical use of the 1892 was done by 1945. My revolver. I've already shown my revolver in the tabletop clip, but a little more information is that the barrel is dated 1904, and the serial puts it to being produced at the end of 1903, beginning in 1904. It is definitely in excellent shape for its age and era. Firing it feels like firing a 32 ACP. So much so I was inspired to do the Elam McCollum shootout, since it felt very similar to shooting the Ruby. Although the sights are easy to pick up since the front side is high, the shoot's a bit high for me, which is why I accidentally shot my camera in the first video I made on this revolver several years ago. To answer the ripoff from saying Arsenal, would I take it to war? The answer is meh. I'd much rather have a Webley, one of the American 1917s, and definitely a 1911 over the 1892. I would definitely take the 1892 over the Nagant revolver, and maybe even choose it over the Luger, as I'm still not sure I would trust its reliability in the mud. The big thing that stops me from saying yes is the weak round. Tying everything back to my introduction, this is a well-designed revolver that should have made the French proud, but in execution, the weak ammunition really holds it back. Please be aware of where your elected officials and the groups that claim to represent you stand on the Constitution. Please join the GOA, the biggest and best no-compromise 2A group out there, and get $5 off your membership with the link in my description. If you like my content, please check out my other videos, like, comment, and subscribe. Engagement really helps with the algorithm. Also, please check out my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, and who I support on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.